The most dangerous person in the room is rarely the loudest. It is the one who watches, listens, remembers, and refuses to react. While others spend their power explaining themselves, the silent person is collecting information. And by the time everyone realizes what is happening, the silent one has already made their move. There is a strange power in no longer needing to be understood by everyone. Most people spend enormous amounts of emotional energy trying to control how others perceive them. They explain why they acted a certain way. They defend decisions nobody asked them to defend. They rush to correct every misunderstanding. They answer every accusation, respond to every provocation, and feel compelled to prove that their intentions were good. They believe they are protecting themselves, but often they are simply handing pieces of themselves away. The moment you realize that not every person deserves an explanation, something changes inside you. You become quieter. Not because you are afraid, not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally understand that access to your thoughts is not a right everyone possesses. There are people who ask questions because they genuinely want to understand you. And there are people who ask questions because they are searching for something they can use against you. There are people who misunderstand you accidentally. And there are people who misunderstand you deliberately because accepting the truth would destroy the story they have created about you. If you try to explain yourself equally to both, you will exhaust yourself. This is where emotional burnout begins. You spend your days managing other people's perceptions, absorbing their moods, responding to their disappointment, calming their anger, answering their suspicions, and carrying their expectations. You call it empathy. You call it kindness. You call it keeping the peace. But eventually, your nervous system does not care what you call it. It simply knows that you are carrying too much. Silence gives you something precious, distance. And distance allows you to see clearly. When someone provokes you, you do not have to answer immediately. When someone criticizes you, you do not have to defend yourself immediately. When someone tries to pull you into an emotional storm, you can step back and observe what is actually happening. That pause is where your power returns, because the person who controls your emotions can influence your decisions. If someone can make you angry whenever they want, they have discovered a button inside you. If they can make you feel guilty whenever they want, they have discovered another. If they can make you anxious simply by withdrawing their approval, they have found another. Your silence breaks that pattern. It tells your mind, I do not have to react simply because someone expects a reaction. And this is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming selective. You can remain deeply empathetic without becoming emotionally available to everyone. You can care about someone's suffering without making their suffering your responsibility. You can understand someone's anger without allowing that anger to enter your own mind. The world constantly tries to pull you into reaction. Your discipline begins when you stop allowing every emotional demand to become an obligation. Sometimes the strongest answer is not an argument, not an explanation, and not revenge. Sometimes it is simply the decision to remain composed and let time reveal what words never could. The moment you stop reacting to everything, you begin to notice something uncomfortable. Many people are not trying to communicate with you. They are trying to control your emotional state. They provoke you because they know anger makes you careless. They pressure you because anxiety makes you surrender. They create guilt because guilt makes you explain yourself. And once you understand this, you begin to see why emotional control is one of the greatest forms of personal freedom. Think about how quickly a small comment can change an entire day. Someone criticizes you, someone ignores you, someone speaks to you with disrespect. Suddenly your heart begins racing, your mind starts constructing arguments, and you replay the conversation again and again. You imagine what you should have said. You prepare what you will say next time. You become consumed by an interaction that lasted only a few seconds. The other person has already moved on, but you are still carrying them inside your mind. This is how stress becomes emotional imprisonment. The problem is not always what happened. The problem is that you surrendered control of your attention to what happened. A disciplined person creates a space between the event and the response. Something happens, and instead of immediately reacting, they pause. They ask themselves a simple question. What is actually happening here? That question changes everything, because when you pause, emotion begins to lose its authority. You may still feel anger. You may still feel disappointment. You may still feel anxiety. Emotional strength does not mean becoming incapable of feeling. It means refusing to allow every feeling to become an instruction. Anger can tell you that something matters. It does not automatically tell you what to do. Anxiety can tell you that uncertainty exists. It does not mean danger is certain. Guilt can tell you that you care about someone's feelings. It does not mean you have done something wrong. This distinction is essential. People who constantly react confuse emotion with truth. They feel something intensely, so they assume the feeling must be accurate. Then they act from that feeling, and later regret what they said or did. The silent person learns to wait, and waiting is not weakness. Waiting is information. When you refuse to answer immediately, you give yourself time to observe the other person's behavior. Is this a genuine disagreement, or are they trying to provoke you? Is this criticism useful, or is it simply an attempt to diminish you? Are they asking for your help, or are they transferring their emotional responsibility onto you? You cannot answer these questions when your mind is drowning in emotion. You need distance. This is why boundaries and silence belong together. A boundary is not always a dramatic declaration. Sometimes a boundary is simply refusing to participate in a conversation while you are emotionally overwhelmed. Sometimes it is saying, I will think about that and respond later. Sometimes it is leaving the room. Sometimes it is choosing not to defend yourself against an accusation that does not deserve your energy. The world will often interpret your calm as weakness because it is accustomed to immediate reactions. Let it. You do not need to prove your strength by becoming louder than the person challenging you. Your strength is demonstrated when they cannot decide what happens inside your mind. Once you stop giving people immediate access to your emotions, you regain something more valuable than winning an argument. You regain yourself. And when you can control your response, other people's chaos can no longer control your direction. There comes a moment when you realize that not every emotion you encounter belongs to you. Someone enters the room angry, and suddenly you feel tense. Someone tells you about their problems, and you spend the entire night thinking about them. Someone is disappointed in you, and you immediately feel guilty. Someone is anxious, and before long, you are carrying their anxiety as if it were your own. This is where empathy can become a hidden form of exhaustion. You were taught that being a good person means being available. You learn to listen, comfort, forgive, understand, and rescue. You became the person others called when they were falling apart. At first, it felt meaningful. You felt needed. But slowly, something began to disappear. Your own peace. Emotional burnout rarely arrives dramatically. It accumulates quietly. One conversation becomes 10. One favor becomes an expectation. One person's crisis becomes your responsibility. You keep saying yes because you understand their pain. You keep giving because you know what they are going through. And eventually, you become exhausted while everyone around you assumes you are strong enough to keep carrying more. But empathy without boundaries is not strength. It is emotional overexposure. The silent person learns something different. You can understand someone without absorbing them. You can listen to a person's pain without becoming responsible for solving it. You can care about someone's anxiety without allowing it to become your anxiety. You can support someone without sacrificing your own stability. This requires a difficult form of discipline, knowing where you end and another person begins. When someone is angry, you do not have to become angry. When someone is disappointed, you do not have to immediately repair their feelings. When someone refuses to take responsibility for their choices, you do not have to become the person who carries the consequences. This is where silence becomes a protective wall. You stop explaining. You stop rescuing. You stop rushing into every emotional storm simply because you have the ability to understand it. And strangely, when you stop constantly managing everyone else's emotions, you begin hearing your own again. You notice how tired you are. You notice what you actually want. You notice which relationships leave you peaceful and which ones leave you depleted. You begin recognizing that anxiety often grows when your life contains too many emotional obligations that were never truly yours. Healthy boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. They allow you to remain compassionate without becoming consumed. They allow you to love people without losing yourself inside their problems. And they teach you one of the most important lessons of emotional strength. You are allowed to care without carrying everything. The quietest person in the room may simply be the one who finally learned that protecting their peace is not selfish. It is necessary. One of the greatest sources of emotional exhaustion is the endless need to explain yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you. You explain your intentions. You clarify your words. You defend your choices. You repeat yourself, hoping that eventually they will see what you meant. But some people are not searching for understanding. They are searching for confirmation of the story they have already created about you. And the more you explain, the more exhausted you become. There is a certain freedom in realizing that your life does not require a courtroom defense. You do not have to present evidence for every decision you make. You do not need universal approval before moving forward. Let your behavior speak. If someone believes you are selfish, let your consistency reveal the truth. If someone believes you are weak, do not waste your energy proving strength. If someone misunderstands your silence, allow them to misunderstand it. Time has a way of exposing what explanations cannot. This does not mean ignoring legitimate criticism. A wise person listens when correction contains truth. But there is a difference between accepting useful feedback and desperately trying to win approval from someone committed to judging you. The first develops you. The second drains you. And this is where emotional boundaries become essential. You must learn to recognize when a conversation has stopped being productive. When every explanation creates another accusation, when every answer produces another demand, when every attempt at peace becomes another opportunity for conflict, continuing the conversation is no longer communication. It is emotional exhaustion. Sometimes you protect yourself by saying less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally understand that your peace is more valuable than the last word. You do not need everyone to understand you. You need to understand yourself. And once you do, the opinions that once controlled your emotions begin to lose their power. When you stop rushing to fill every silence, something fascinating happens. People begin revealing themselves. Most conversations are filled with noise because silence makes people uncomfortable. Someone asks a question, and before you have even considered the answer, they begin talking again. Someone becomes defensive, and they start explaining themselves. Someone feels uncertain, and they reveal more than they intended, simply because they cannot tolerate the empty space. The disciplined person does not fear that space. They allow it to exist. They listen carefully. They watch the difference between someone's words and their behavior. They notice what changes when they are challenged. They notice who becomes aggressive when denied, who becomes manipulative when ignored, and who remains respectful, even when they do not get what they want. Silence becomes observation. and observation gives you information. You begin to understand that people often reveal themselves more clearly when you stop trying to convince them of anything. You do not interrupt their explanations. You do not rush to defend yourself. You simply listen. This is especially important for empathetic people. When you care deeply about others, you may become so focused on understanding their feelings that you overlook their patterns. You hear their reasons, their pain, their excuses, and you forget to examine their behavior. Silence creates enough distance to see the pattern. You begin asking better questions. Does this person respect my boundaries? Do their actions match their words? Do they only come close when they need something? Do they take responsibility when they hurt someone? Or do they always find someone else to blame? You do not need to interrogate anyone, just watch. Time is often the most honest witness. And once you stop needing to dominate every conversation, you discover that you can learn far more by listening than by speaking. The silent person does not need to control the room. They understand that sometimes the room will reveal everything on its own. But eventually, all of this leads to something deeper. The purpose of silence is not to defeat other people. It is to reach a point where other people's behavior no longer determines who you become. That is the real victory. You can spend your entire life trying to win arguments, prove people wrong, expose their hypocrisy, or make someone regret disrespecting you. But if their actions still control your emotions, have you really won? If one message can destroy your peace, one criticism can ruin your confidence, one person's rejection can make you question your worth, then they still possess influence over you. Emotional self-mastery begins when that influence starts disappearing. You still feel. You still care. You still have empathy. But you become selective about what deserves your emotional energy. You stop allowing someone else's anxiety to become your anxiety. You stop allowing someone else's anger to dictate your mood. You stop carrying guilt simply because another person is disappointed by a boundary you needed to establish. This is not emotional numbness. It is emotional discipline. There will always be people who misunderstand your silence. Some will call you distant. Some will assume you are arrogant. Others may try harder to provoke you simply because they are accustomed to receiving an immediate reaction. You do not need to correct every interpretation. Your responsibility is not to manage everyone's opinion of you. Your responsibility is to manage yourself. And this is where silence becomes something far more powerful than simply saying nothing. It becomes a decision to conserve your attention. You stop spending precious mental energy on arguments that produce nothing. You stop replaying conversations that cannot be changed. You stop imagining revenge against people who have already taken enough of your peace. You begin investing that energy somewhere else, into your work, into your health, into your relationships, into becoming the person you said you wanted to become. Eventually, you realize that the strongest response to chaos is not always confrontation. Sometimes it is composure. Sometimes it is distance. Sometimes it is simply continuing your life without allowing someone else's behavior to become the center of it. That is why the silent ones appear to win. They are not necessarily defeating everyone around them. They are defeating the part of themselves that needed to react to everything. And when you no longer need to prove your strength, defend your worth, or control every opinion, you become difficult to manipulate, not because you became colder, but because you finally became responsible for your own inner world. The greatest victory is not making others fear your silence. It is reaching a place where your peace no longer depends on their noise.